Let me just say that it's really hard to follow a talk on sex and power. It just doesn't seem fair. I think I got chosen, though, because I show a unique ability to what Deborah called have a low capacity for thinking and a low capacity for action, which is unusual. I have to tell you that I've been with Donald Trump on several occasions, and he's not a multi-billionaire. He is an example of the power of promotion, self-promotion. It always bugged me, being in the real estate, I was a real estate developer for a long time, and it just didn't seem fair that he started out with $200 million. You know, it's not like he's this self-made guy, so hair notwithstanding. Then I have to give one quick story about disinhibition. I worked for some time with a very powerful guy, and we'd hold meetings, and partway through the meeting, he had a bad back. Partway through the meeting, he would disappear and lie on the floor, and you'd be sitting there at the table, and there would be nobody on the other side. And he said, just keep talking. So you'd talk into space, and then the answer would come from the floor, you know. And so finally, I got kind of tired of this whole thing. I said, what the heck? So I decided I'm just going to go around and lie down on the floor next to him. So I figured this is my expression of being powerful, too. So I lay on the floor right next to him, and we talked, both of us speaking up into the air, when an assistant walked in the room. We had to describe what that was about. Finally, this last lecture, I've always had slides or tried to, be a little slicker in my presentation than I'm going to try to be tonight. But I've never left time for questions. So what I'm going to try to do is blast through what I have to say with no slides and leave time for questions. And I may do some editing at the end to cut things off. So I've gotten rid of slides, and I've gotten rid of stories. I have stories to illustrate all the points that I would like to make tonight, but I'm going to cut those out. I have to start out by saying that I'm delighted with the opportunity to address you tonight. I'm a huge fan of GSB students. I think the world of you. I think you're going to make a big difference, and I've learned to expect great things from GSB grads. After you graduate, I will follow your careers, whether it's with cards, calls, emails, or by rumor or hearsay. I was walking through JFK airport the other day through the security, and I had somebody call out, Professor Peterson. And it was somebody I'd had in a real estate class 10 years ago. And while I didn't remember his name, I remembered that he sat in the upper right-hand corner and blew a cold call. As I understand it, the concept of the last lecture was pioneered in the 1960s at Brandeis University as a way of getting teachers to conclude what is important in their work, to draw general conclusions, and to present them to students as if it were the last time they would ever stand before them. And I think that's a very interesting formulation, a way of thinking about how do you boil down what it is you've taken out of your life's experience or your studies and impart it to others in a last lecture. If you think about that, if somebody asked you to do that, that's kind of a daunting request. If you imagine standing before your peers or people you like and admire and concluding with what you think is the real essence of your takeaways. When I worry about the fact that some of you might actually heed what I have to say tonight, I'm comforted by the fact that I know that you know this is coming from a part-time lecturer who teaches an obscure second-year elective. It's at the end of your second year after a long day of classes during the spring. So I'm not too worried. I always think of Churchill, who once quipped at the sight of a thick document, "This report, by its very length, defends itself against the risk of being read." I've given about half a dozen or so of these last lectures, and none has been the same. So I've clearly not done a very good job of summarizing what my takeaways in life are. The best I can do is say this is kind of what I'm thinking in 2006. It won't be about clear heights or setbacks or NOIs or negotiating strategies or Monte Carlo simulations or building spreadsheets or anything like that. All of that is important and will have an impact on your business careers, but none of it is worthy of a last hour together. I had a partner ask me when I came here, why are you going to give another one of these last lectures? And so I'll just take a second and answer that question for you. I've been teaching here for 14 years, as was mentioned. I started out teaching a real estate course to keep my mind off litigation that I was involved in. It was very debilitating. It was so debilitating that I didn't want it to absorb my life, but it was too important to ignore. So I decided to take this, what I thought would be a brief interlude at the GSB, and it's turned into a really rewarding second career. So the last lecture is an extension of that commitment to teaching. As a brief aside, I would encourage any of you who may be interested in teaching to do it. It will keep you connected with young people, will keep you connected to growing and learning, and the hustle and bustle of the marketplace can sometimes drive away some of the good things that happen here. Robert Bolt's 1966 play, A Man for All Seasons, has a character, an ambitious young man by the name of Richard Rich, who is counseled by Sir Thomas More that he would be a good teacher. And he dismisses this by saying, if I was, who would know it? To which Sir Thomas More replies, and this is what has haunted me since I first heard it, you, your pupils, your friends, God. Not a bad audience, that. The essence of More's response has kept me juggling a fairly complex life to come back here, and it's been richly rewarding. Thus, I want to begin tonight by thanking you for allowing me to be with you at this time in your lives, thanking you for the invitation to be here tonight, and thanking you, your parents, your friends, and your mentors for preparing you to be qualified to be at this unique institution at this time. So with that as a preamble, let me begin by saying that I mentioned to all of my students that they should begin every new activity they do by imagining winning. Think about what winning would be and do it with enough detail that it will get you over the rough points that you're sure to encounter. So it wouldn't be fair if I didn't tell you what winning would be for me tonight. I'll have accomplished my objective in speaking to you tonight if I get some of you to seriously consider tweaking your launch trajectory in light of tonight's discussion of values, integrity, and trust. With this, I would hope that some of you would make a commitment to yourselves. To get in the right frame of mind for this, I want you to fast forward 50 years. Imagine yourself sitting here in Bishop Auditorium. You're sitting next to the same people. Take a second to look around. Look to the left. Look to the right. Check behind you. Now imagine these same people with gray hair, bald pates, thicker midsections. Same people. Let me suggest how you'll feel when that reality is upon you. You're at your 50th reunion. You'll feel like you were hit by a train. You'll feel like I look. By the way, I look a little worse than I usually do. My son, who's here, my son and daughter are with us tonight, both sophomores at Stanford, Ben and Annie, dropped me off at a parking lot the other night right next to a big oak tree that had a low-hanging branch. I bounced out of his car and walked right into the branch. So I look a little worse. But I do realize that I am older than I feel. And I always tell my wife that the worst part about being this old is I'm now married to a grandmother. So now that you've been transported forward 50 years, she has a good sense of humor, so don't worry. Now you've been transported forward 50 years. Imagine asking yourself these questions. What have you done with the last 50 years? That's 100,000 hours of work life, at least. More importantly, what has it meant to you and to those you love? What will be the residue of all these efforts? As you sit here tonight, what would you hope you could say? In other words, what would winning be in life for you? What would the perfect life be? You know, I can't think, and I know I've told a few of you this story, but I can't think of the perfect life without thinking of a story of Learned Hand, who was the greatest American jurist never to be appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. He was a federal judge in the state of New York. And he was asked what a perfect day would be. And he said, well, I'd sleep in till late. I'd be served breakfast in bed. I would be driven to the stadium in a limousine. The crowd would cheer when I entered. I'd score the winning touchdown. I'd be carried off on the shoulders of my teammates. I would go home and have a leisurely bath. And then I would go that evening to a dinner where would be assembled all the great minds of all time. And over the din, I would hear a voice shout out, "Shut up, Voltaire. We want to listen to Learned Hand." Now, that's a Technicolor version. You can imagine that perfect day, can't you? Well, I want you to imagine a perfect life that you can report on in 50 years. Make it in Technicolor. And the reason I ask you to construct this is because if you'll do it at this stage, as you know, minor tweaks at the beginning of a long journey can have significant impact, can have a really important effect on where you'll end up. So I want you to think about taking the road of life, this trail taken only once. It's particularly worth imagining winning, and do it in some detail, and particularly at inflection points, such as the one that you're approaching as you graduate from the GSB. So my message tonight is that how effective you are at leaving a lasting mark or winning in your life, having a perfect life, will be a direct function of your values, your integrity, and the trust you engender in others. So my last lecture will be about your core values, your behavior around those values, and your ultimate trustworthiness. This, therefore, will determine the course of your life, the legacy you'll leave, and the good or harm you'll do over the next half century. Now let me elaborate on the relationship between values, integrity, and trust. And then I'll close with some idiosyncratic advice that I think is rooted in those three concepts. Some students have asked me if I needed to compromise values in order to achieve success. To that I respond, not only does one not need to compromise values to achieve success, but if your values are abandoned, there'll be an awful price to pay. That price may come in the form of cynicism or becoming overly wary. It may manifest itself in broken relationships, scandal, or constant strife. Or it may simply mean that you feel shabby or diminished when you make your 50th year reunion. Whatever success you may achieve in your business careers, and I would expect that it'll be impressive, you'll live a shallower, sadder, less fulfilling life if you compromise important values in getting there. I brought these books tonight not to recommend them to you, but I'm in the midst of reading both of these books about the Enron scandal, The Smartest Guys in the Room and Conspiracy of Fools. And it's so clear to me what has happened with compromising of values, with changing values, with giving up one thing for another, and what it's done to the lives of those who are involved. I'm not the first to suggest that you start with your values. I think it was Socrates that had engraved over the temple at Delphi that the beginning of all learning is to know thyself. 2,000 years later, Shakespeare had Polonius say to his son Laertes, "To thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man." So how can you know yourself? If that's the beginning of all knowledge, if understanding these core values that you have is the place that you need to start to organize the perfect life, how can you know yourself? When I think of that journey of discovery, I think of Lenny Skutnik and Arlen Williams. Do these names mean anything to anyone in here? Is there anyone here from Washington, D.C.? Nobody from Washington, D.C. There you go. All right. Well, you know the Arlen Williams Bridge. Does that mean anything to you?
Yep.
It's the old Rochambeau Bridge, now the 14th Street Bridge, that got renamed. And I'll briefly tell you the story of how that bridge got renamed. On Wednesday, January 13th, 1982, Air Florida Flight 90 arrived from South Florida to turn around and head back to Fort Lauderdale. It was a cold day. There was snow. The plane was de-iced. There were delays, and it sat on the tarmac for 49 minutes without being able to take off. The pilot decided that since they'd already been delayed over an hour, hour and a half, that he would take off. And so he took off. It took an extra 800 yards, almost a half mile, to take off. The plane rose to about 337 feet, at which time it began to mush. It was unable to keep going and curved around and landed, hitting the 14th Street Bridge and landing in the icy Potomac, broke through an inch of ice, and the plane quickly went below the water. 73 of the 79 passenger and crew were immediately killed, and 6 people clung to the tail of this plane. Because it was a snowy, tough day, it was tough for ambulances to get there or for helicopters, rescue helicopters to get there, as these 6 people huddled around this tail and tried to stay alive. The firemen and the police set up barricades and barriers. The people who were there tried to throw things, ropes, makeshift ways to fish these people out of the water. They were unable to do it. Finally, the helicopter arrived 21 minutes later and threw a rope down, pulled a person to the shore, came back, and who was identified as a bald-headed man, or the 6th passenger, name unknown, took the rope and gave it to an injured passenger. The helicopter came back another time. He again caught the rope and again passed it to another passenger. And the final time that the helicopter came around, by then he had slipped under the water. He was the only person to have drowned in that. We later found out his name was Arlen Williams. He was a bank examiner from Atlanta, Georgia, 46 years old. No indication that this man would be a hero before this. There was also one of the women that was hanging onto the tail section, got weaker and weaker, and finally floated off and had jet fuel in her eyes, couldn't tell where she was, and she cried out, "Help me." With this, Lenny Skutnik, who was a $14,000 a year clerk in the Congressional Budget Office, broke through the rope lines, tore off his overcoat and jacket, took off his shoes, and jumped in the water to save this woman. Well, how did they know? Did they know that there was a set of core values in them that would provoke them to those behaviors? I don't think they knew that going into that day, any more than I think I know how I would behave in that, or that I know how I would behave under certain conditions. It is our values, however, that will determine where we draw the bright lines, and when we're under pressure, when there are dilemmas. Often when things are equally attractive or equally repugnant, it is our core values that will force us to draw the bright lines and make the decisions. For those of you in the auditorium who may think you know your core values today, let me quote my favorite quote of all times, also from another jurist, Oliver Wendell Holmes, who said, "I would not give a fig for the simplicity this side of complexity, but I would give my life for the simplicity the other side of complexity." Thus it is with our values. We may know and think we know our values today, but it's when they're tested in the crucible of life through experience that our values emerge. So it's worth considering in the still, in the calm, in the pre-battle moments before you enter the fray. But you'll really discover your battles when you get, or your values when you get out there. Suggestion: I think you should write out a statement of values now, even though they may change and you'll discover a lot about them. At least you'll know what you want them to be. And you'll have a pretty darn good time of where they really are today if you'll consider where you spend your time, your money, and your thoughts. Those are your real values. Your values will continue to drive every choice you make in your life. They will determine the contours of your life. When you stay late at work to work on a project, rather than go to your child's soccer game, you've made a statement of values. When you work 90 hours a week, you'll have made a value judgment. When you stay up too late, you'll have made a value judgment, Annie. Just kidding. When a business develops a budget, it's making a series of value judgments. When it hires from the outside, it's expressing values. When it takes time to regularly celebrate the accomplishments of its people, it's expressing values. More generally, whenever we select between compelling but mutually exclusive alternatives, we use our values as the tiebreaker. So you'll all deal with some thorny dilemmas that will yield only to a hierarchy of values that you've not yet articulated. Your core values are where you'll go under pressure, when no one is looking or recording your actions. They are your operating system, the software of your life that's running 24/7 behind the scenes. So understand them, test them, review your actions in light of them. While your expressed values are open to any who would hear them, your real values, your core values, are a half-open book for people to see. And when these diverge, your expressed values and your real values, people naturally will legitimately question your integrity. Whenever I ask a group of people if they have integrity, or would anybody who doesn't have integrity please raise their hand? Nobody offers that. And I think that's because we think we have integrity when our actions reflect our values, and indeed they do. It's when they diverge from our stated values that we violate integrity. And also the word is so loaded that nobody likes to admit they don't have it. But I would say that real, unassailable, ever-present integrity, the kind that holds up in the dark even when no one is looking, can be tough to claim. It means we are at one with ourselves. Both our public and our private lives, our stated values, and our observed values are congruent. So I'm going to do some editing on the fly. A couple more suggestions. Because life is hard, you're going to have to make hard choices, which can challenge your values. To figure out what your values are, besides being in the crucible of life, living to age 60, read. Do a lot of reading. You can live 100 lives if you read. And then don't be timid. Get experience as soon as you can. I used to say, throw yourself in swiftly moving streams. Be entrepreneurial. Even if you're in a big company or working as a banker or a consultant, think about being an owner-manager. So finally, how does this relate to trust? Having clear values, core values, having the integrity to make your stated and values and your actions the same. Trust is important because we don't trust people when we think they don't have integrity. If you would be trusted, do something that eliminates the gap between your stated values and your real values. Let me give you just a brief exposition here on trust, and I won't take too long on this. But even though I love and respect my family members, and in one sense I completely trust them, I wouldn't trust my 14-year-old daughter to drive me to work. I wouldn't trust my wife to fly me to the next meeting. I wouldn't trust my business partner, who's a lawyer, to do surgery on me. So we require more than just character to trust. We require competence. And competence, even competence isn't enough. They have to be trusted, somebody has to be powerful. So character, competence, and power are the three things that are required to be trusted. So in summary, if you'd be an effective leader, know and articulate clearly your core values, eliminate any gap between your claimed and lived values, accept that this will only give you one of trust's preconditions, and now become competent and empowered if you'd be trusted. Thus, the essence of my last lecture is to do those four things. The remainder of my time, I want to just give you quick bullet point advice that resides in that formulation of values integrity, and trust. Unlike classroom takeaways, these are take it or leave it aways. They're a bit idiosyncratic, and they really just represent one person's take on the world of work. So here goes. If you can find a mentor early in your career, do so. Later on, be one. Do more listening than talking. You're leaving the GSB armed with the best maps the world has to offer for the territory you're about to enter. But they're merely maps. And maps are not the territory. There are people who know the territory. There are people full of street smarts. They may not be able to read your maps, and you may feel slightly superior because they can't read your maps. However, they have a wisdom born of having walked the trails and of experience. So listen to them, respect them, and learn from them. Develop a plan for your life, and do it soon. You wouldn't organize or finance a business without a business plan, so don't treat your life as an ongoing case of first impression. Come up with a blueprint. You can always change it. Don't live merely day to day, lest you fritter away your enormous potential. As a part of setting goals, recognize that whatever summits you choose to climb will mean you have to eliminate others. So you're going to have to make some hard choices. My advice is to pick the highest possible reasonable peak. You can always scale back. You're unlikely to scale up. And I have examples for all of these, and I'm just cutting them all out, so we have time for a question. As you seriously contemplate which ascent to make, think broadly about your life, not just about your career, your next job, or even the next decade. Think 50 years. In thinking broadly in making your plan, take into account Frederick Buechner's advice. To find meaning in your life, you'll need to discover three things: a person to be, someone to love, and a work to do. Rather than give examples of this, I'll simply assert that you're unlikely to find balance, true balance, in your life unless you have all three legs of the stool. That has to do with being, loving, and working. As Peter Drucker says, build on your strengths, make your weaknesses irrelevant. Don't spend time trying to fix everything that's wrong with you, lest you neglect your natural gifts. Be wary of getting locked in too early in your career. If you fail to change with things you learn, you'll miss a lot of growth. Your thinking will evolve with insights. If you're anything like me, you'll discover the following: that the prowess that you developed in school with analysis will yield to the synthesis required of leaders. Your well-regarded and well-rewarded facility with words and concepts will be overwhelmed by the imperative for action, and your interest in and facility with manipulating and managing things will give way to how compelling are the relationships in your life. So that I've boiled this down to the following progression: actions are greater than words, wholes greater than parts, and people greater than things. Quick word about each. As far as actions, what you do from here on out will count more than what you say. You won't be able to talk your way out of problems you've behaved your way into. In a world of spin, you may, and with your skills, you may be tempted to wordsmith a mission statement, to craft a clever response to a thorny question, or to ensure that blame ends up on another's doorstep. Unless you have ambitions as a lifelong politician, these won't work. As far as wholes, these well-honed analytical skills you've developed will have to evolve into an ability to connect the dots. I'm confident that you'll soon see how everything is indeed connected, and with this you'll find great relief in the expression, all things considered. Finally, as regards people, you'll find that business is all about people. My simple advice: recognize that people are smart. They'll know if you're a phony. They'll see through your techniques. So above all, love them. This is not so hard once you recognize that love is a decision. If you love someone, you'll sacrifice for them. If you love someone, you'll do what's in their interest, even when it's not convenient. And as you make sacrifices and do hard and inconvenient things for any love you decided to give them will now transform into genuine and durable connection. In turn, this will compel trust and require higher mutual commitments and challenge your ability to live with integrity. This can be pretty painful, really. I mean, I'm not saying this is an easy thing to do, but it's sometimes rewarding, and it's almost always the right thing to do. Then if you need to fire people, redirect them, or even intervene in their personal lives, you'll do so with confidence that comes from having their interest at heart. And if they know your motivations, they'll more often than not accept your actions and occasionally even be grateful for them. Don't let your MBA get in the way of your education. In particular, don't be afraid of work that some might view beneath an MBA. I spent a lot of my life, early life, delivering papers, washing dishes, selling vegetables, mowing lawns, etc. And all of these turned out to be valuable workplace lessons, give me valuable workplace lessons that HBS forgot to mention. Value experience. That goes along a little bit with respecting people who may not be able to read your maps. Imagine taking a flight when over the PA system comes, "Today's pilot has carefully studied the avionics manuals. She received very high scores on her written exams and graduated from the best training program. I'm sure you'll join me in wishing her well on her first ever cockpit experience." That's how people may see you as you take the left seat. So before you assume the controls, ride in the back of the plane, sit in the right-hand seat. Front-end load your career. What you do in the next decade will have a whole lot to do with the course of your professional life. In my view, it is worth tilting out of balance a little bit during this first decade. You have to decide what the right rhythm is for you. For some, daily balance is vital. For others, monthly or yearly balance. Others, a decade being out of balance is okay. Think career more than job. Jobs come and go. The best ones build towards something. The worst ones steal your time and energy. Consider how the work you're about to do will lead to the goal that you have in life and will lead you to give this 50-year report on the perfect life. Don't evaluate your job offers by promises of high pay, great work-life balance, or whether or not you're joining an in-favor company, a hot industry, or something your peers will think is cool. Although I will have to say that I did take a job on the French Riviera right out of school, largely because it made me look so cool to my classmates. Just turned out that I got lucky. Find a place that shares your values, that has people you like and respect, and I'd say importantly, that is likely to grow and be profitable. A lot of opportunities come out of growth and profit. Word about profits, don't be embarrassed by making significant profits. They're a measure of how well you serve customers and how you add value. You'll always be working for customers. Be grateful for that accountability in your life. A lot of people think, well, if I can become powerful, if I can get to a high level, then I'm no longer accountable, which is maybe this lack of inhibitions that Deborah talked about. Go early or stay late, but not both and not all the time. Borrowing from the golf couplet about putting and driving in the workplace, early is for dough, late is for show. Early morning hours, you'll get lots done, you'll organize your day, you can do things when others aren't around. Late are opportunities for socializing and wrapping up the day. Both have their places. You can do both, but just don't do them all the time or you'll burn out and you'll wear out everybody else in the organization. Be entrepreneurial in spirit. In other words, learn how to control and manage assets or to access and direct resources and assets that you don't control. Learn how to manage through influence and not more formal authority. I think I was really lucky in starting out in the real estate industry because you're always dealing with a virtual organization. You're not the boss of anybody. Then think like an owner-manager, even though you don't own the firm or run a P&L. Recognize that you'll be hired for the skills you learned here and you'll be fired for your behavior or limited by your behavior. In most cases, the behavior that will limit you will have a whole lot to doing what you should have with not doing what you should have learned at your mother's knee. When you negotiate, make sure you're not the only winner. It's good to understand anchoring, positioning, first offer, zero sum, prisoner's dilemmas, and all the things you learn about negotiating here. But the best and most durable agreements in life depend on trust and goodwill. So consider your negotiations as a set of reasonable conversations that merely have the very awkward format of offer, counteroffer. And finally, recognize that not all negotiations matter. You want to lose some negotiations, especially with your spouses and your children and business partners. Never try to go to the documents to resolve a disagreement. Don't worry about pleasing others at all costs. At the early stages of your life, you're more likely to want to please others. It's better to be respected and trusted than to be loved. If you're respected and trusted, you may eventually be loved. If, however, you're loved without respect or trust, you'll eventually be abandoned, betrayed, or mistreated. And that will have a lot of effects in your life. When looking for good people in your business, don't keep hiring yourself or just relying on resumes that look good and impressive. Embrace opportunities to sacrifice. Giving up things that matter to you for things that matter more is the key to caring, to passion, to love, and to success. Simply put, we love those things and people for which we sacrifice. Just, if you don't believe that, think how you feel about the GSB after spending 2 years and umpteen thousands of dollars here. You care about it, don't you? As a manager, learn to fly at 30,000 feet and at strafing level. Then do both. Don't fixate. As far as time management, be early. Give yourself artificial deadlines. Sleep on decisions. Spend lots of time listening to others. Manage by wandering around. Don't simply manage your inbox and outbox. Most of the business issues that you'll encounter need to be anticipated before they land fully developed on your desk. Let me just wrap up here quickly. A couple of things on change and conflict. These are some of the things that you really have to manage. Don't fear change or conflict. As a new manager, those are things you tend to like to avoid. Respect them both as worthy of your best care and your deepest thought. Choose carefully what you change. People don't like change. And when you make a change, make sure you're moving toward something rather than away from a problem. You're moving towards an objective, not away from. So many changes are made when people see a problem, they change things to get away from the problem. Make changes sooner than later. Keep it simple. And I would say just in general. I was with Ram Charan, who's a famous author and coach, and he said basically that boards really can only remember and work on 3 or 4 things. And you just need to stay with those headlines. So learn to write one-page memos, learn to develop 6-dial dashboards, learn to have 3 or 4 headlines in everything you do. When you make a change that doesn't work, quickly admit it, accept blame, move on. When you make one that does work, allocate the credit to others and celebrate it with them. So far as conflict, understand its nature. If the conflict is over values, get out. If the conflict is over goals, consider compromise. And if the conflict is over means, embrace it. You'll learn from it. You'll synergize. Because business is a competitive sport, it will be easy to get the competitive juices flowing and to allow that to get the better of you. Don't allow room for grudges, bitterness, anger, or desire for retribution. No matter how irrational it may seem, it's in your long-term best interest to let go. Protect and develop your own brand. Your brand is your promise. It's what people can rely on when dealing with you. Great brands are extraordinarily valuable, but they're one-way sticky. It takes years to build them up through action after action after action, and they can be destroyed with a single act. Don't miss the chance in your first job to set up your own baseline. Set your baseline communications so that you don't need to throw tantrums to show you're upset, curse to make memorable your points, or show wild exuberance to show you're pleased. If you fail to set this reasonably calm baseline as a manager, your manic depressive fluctuations will drive everybody nuts and limit your effectiveness. Along these lines, develop a world-class temperament. This often starts with repeating to yourself, it's not about me. Now, you've been living in a world where it is about you. You've been feeding yourself. You've been gaining skills. It has been about you. But just as it was a shock to medieval man to have Copernicus and later Galileo, show that the earth was not the center of the universe, it is a shock to some to get out there and realize that they are not the center of decisions, how they feel and care about things. You'll grow from removing yourself from the center. Well, we may not like it that our planet occupies an obscure corner in one of 250 million galaxies. We really resent it and take it personally that it stubbornly continues to revolve around the sun, whether or not we're there. But it does. Management consists of dealing with a series of problems. The higher you go, the thornier the problems. The tougher ones don't yield to the sorts of analyses that you've learned here at the GSB. Most of the really tough ones yield, if at all, to things like character, values, integrity, trust, information, kindness, patience, listening, tough-mindedness that may offend, persistence, fearlessness, determination, character traits. Prepare for adversity or failure. Just don't let it be terminal. If you failed at something, if you haven't failed at something, you haven't been trying hard enough. You've batted 1,000 to get in here. Very few of you have very many failures. Remember, you get into the American Baseball Hall of Fame if you bat 300. That's getting a hit 30% of the time. So if you're not trying things and not succeeding at them in business, you're probably not trying hard enough. See your reversals as opportunities to learn, to take action, to reveal character, or to give you something to work on. Your trustworthiness will ever be measured against how you handled things when the chips are down, under adversity, under pressure. I won't go through all the things that you should expect there. As you come to understand your core values and where you'll draw the bright lines, state them in a way that others can understand them. Peter Drucker said the following: whenever anyone goes to his or her associates and says, "This is the contribution I plan to concentrate on and the results I should be expected to deliver," the response is always, he underlines always, "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Because trust is so hard to build and so easy to destroy and so nearly impossible to repair, it's treated as your most precious asset. It will become your most important currency. And I was just mentioning to Deborah here afterward that I think you will feel powerful if you know your core values, if you have integrity around them, and if you have trust relationships with people. That in and of itself, that equation is empowering, whether or not you have titular authority within an organization. Building trust is hard work. People can't trust you. Your ability to lead them will be limited to where they would go without you. They will be like, you will be like actually finding a parade and getting in front of it. And that will reduce you to a political calculus that will corrupt you and deny you the sense of accomplishment as a leader over the long run. So if you'd be happy, if you'd enjoy peace and well-being, and if you'd find profound and lasting success, make a difference in the life of another person. Forget mankind. It is an abstraction. Make a difference in the life of another. Build something that outlasts you. Remove obstacles that trip others up and provide insight and create new value. All these activities and focuses and ambitions are more rewarding than monetary success or fame, although the latter often come with those who can do that. You've been in a safe port here. You're getting ready to set sail. I'm living proof that you'll survive whatever storms come your way, and that anyone, underline any one of you, can flourish if you work hard, are true to your core values, and never violate another's trust. With that, I wish you Godspeed and open the floor to questions for the last couple of minutes. Just signal me when you need to cut. Any questions? Yeah.
Can you elaborate, please, on why we should mistrust those who are not powerful?
Who are not powerful because they can't deliver. You know, if I tell my partner, who's a lawyer and a very capable guy, very high character, extraordinarily competent, that I would like to put it in his hands to keep me from paying capital gains tax this year. I really don't want to pay capital gains tax, and I really trust him to keep me from having to do it. He's smart. He can't deliver. He doesn't have the power to change the law. And so a lot of times we see these high character, high competence people, and we trust them, but they're not in a position to deliver. Any more than my wife is in a position to fly that 747. So you really have to, if you don't want to have that kind of naive trust that will betray you in the end and that may make you feel angry at the world, don't be so naive as to trust people that don't have the power to deliver. So if you then would be trustworthy, have character, competence, and power, or you can't be trusted. So don't be afraid of this power. I mean, I think being powerful, and it can come with this incredible calm you have from knowing values, but be powerful. Do not feel unempowered. And then I think what Deborah talked about acting in this way that sort of flaunts power by acting in a dissonant, by my partner that would lie down on the floor and make me talk to him on the floor. That is a silly display and usually quite an insecure display of power. So, in my view. Any other? Yeah.
You talk about being out of balance for a decade. I heard you talk about being out of balance. You never really at one particular moment in perfect balance. But I never thought that a decade would be seen like a reasonable amount of time. I always thought it would be for a period of time.
I would say a decade is at the outer edge. But if you do think about this comment that you made is you are never in balance at every moment of your life. You're out of balance because you can't be doing everything you want to do at the same time. So you are always balancing. And now the question is just what rhythm, what pace do you want to make sure that you exercise every day, every 2 hours, every week, every month, whatever. So, and it's all these priorities, all these values that you have in your life. You're going to have to let them get out of balance, and it's a question of how long. I think I went about as long as anybody being out of balance, and I'm not proud of it. I do think that it helped me achieve certain things I would not have achieved otherwise. And I have made up for it. I've paid price for it. But I'm the same guy that promised my wife if she would marry me, I would learn how to dance. And she came to me about 5 years ago and said, you know, I'd kind of like to cash in on that. It's been 34 years. And I said, yeah, I never told you when. So, I mean, I have an ability to stay out of balance for a pretty long time, and I don't recommend it. I think it costs those you care about. But I do think at the beginning of your career, you really ought to think about managing that to be a little longer than maybe you're comfortable with. I think work-life balance is an important thing, but you do have to be careful with it. Yeah?
What do you do when people in the workplace specifically don't live up to your standards?
Fire. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean that in the sense of kind of the integrity and values.
Well, I think on the integrity and value, to me, values are those things that you cannot compromise. And I also think that values are not virtues. You know, sometimes people think values are these high-minded things that we have to live up to. I think business values have to do, for me, with making a profit every quarter. You know, celebrating success, growing the business at a certain, getting a return on capital that exceeds the cost of capital. I mean, some kind of basic things. Those are important business values. So I think you can kind of compartmentalize those. If you have people in your organization that don't buy into the set of values that are relevant for that organization, they or you need to leave because you cannot compromise values. So, I mean, you can discuss them, you can understand, you can come to a meeting of the minds on them, but if you really are at variance there, my view is often those deteriorate into litigation or worse. Worse, I guess, being violence or something, but one last question, and yeah.
How many shots do you give people when it comes to trust?
That's a great question. I think you never quite fully trust again when somebody has betrayed that trust. So I tend to then make agreements and sort of nail things down more carefully. I'm always a bit wary and a bit cautious when trust has been violated. It's very hard to repair. It is one of the stickiest things, one-way sticky. Long time to build, short time to do it. So I would say that in an ideal world, you would keep forgiving and help people get better. I find as a manager, though, there's too much at stake. There's too many other people relying on things, so that to deal with untrustworthy people or somebody who's violated trust, I have to move on. So I think you have to be pretty tough-minded about it as a manager. With your children, you just keep forgiving them, right? And vice versa. Come on. In any event, it's great to be with you. Thank you.